Listen up, ladies and gentlemen. A fugitive has been on the run for 90 minutes. Average foot speed over uneven ground, barring injuries, 4 miles an hour. That gives us a radius of 6 miles. What I want out of each and every one of you is a hard target search of every gas station, residence, warehouse, farmhouse, hen house, outhouse, or doghouse in that area. Checkpoints go up at 15 miles.
And of course, Tommy Lee Jones from the movie The Fugitive. He would later go on to reprise that role in the movie US Marshals. Joining me on the phone line, a veteran of the US Marshals himself, all the way from the rainy climes of Washington, Mr. Denny Behrend. Denny, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me on board, Lincoln. It's a pleasure.
Well, I got to ask, we had that clip from The Fugitive. Does when you used to set out as a marshal after a fugitive, was it really that dramatic? Did you really have all that running around, or was it a little bit more mellow and kind of, or shall we say, orderly than that?
Well, yes and no. It was very interesting. We had a gentleman here in the Northwest who was convicted of 200 counts of racketeering and attempted murder and so forth, and had always appeared in court. The federal district court judge that was going to sentence him had allowed him to go out on a personal recognizance release. Had allowed him on basically a $250,000 unsecured bond, and of course the gentleman didn't show up for his sentencing date. And I was in the office with my partner, Jack Date at the time, and we got a telephone call from the judge ordering us to his chambers. And as we walked into his chambers, he sat there in his robes with his hand, telephone to his ears, hand over the receiver on the phone, and he looked at us and said, "Get him." And that was as dramatic as it got. And as we walked out, my partner said, I guess that's an order from the bench, isn't it? And I said, yes, it is. 18 months later, we arrested the fugitive in Canada.
Wow, there's a great deal of it's I think it's more brain work than it is actually running through the streets, jumping on top of trains or fist fights or things like that. A lot of it's more in your head than anything else.
That's exactly true. As a matter of fact, my favorite saying is, a dull day in law enforcement is a good day.
Fair enough. I've talked to many cops who have always said, when you see that TV show Cops, they always show him running down the street chasing after the guy with no shirt. They see him wrestling him to the ground. They see the arrest. They see him kicking out the side of the squad car. But they never show the hours and hours and hours of paperwork we have to fill out when that's all said and done.
Yes, that's very true. The television shows that to some degree glamorize law enforcement. Some are very accurate. I mean, those things do in fact happen. But you're right. There's a lot of, when you get through at the end of the day, there's a lot of paperwork, and there's a lot of planning before the arrest go down. We have, my partner and I have spent up to a week planning an arrest. So that it would go smoothly. Children are out of the way. Innocent citizens are accounted for. That sort of thing. So it's not unusual to have a lot of front end work and work at the end of the arrest.
Now, one of the most storied parts of your career was, of course, Christopher Boyce. He was, made notorious as the Falcon in the book and the movie, The Falcon and the Snowman. You did not actually catch him when he was selling secrets to the Soviets, but you did catch him when he busted out of prison, and that was kind of dramatic as well. You had a potentially dangerous guy on your hands, even though Boyce really wasn't really dangerous by nature.
Well, yes, that's correct. Chronologically, you're very accurate there. He was arrested by the FBI for espionage, and he was serving lengthy prison system at Lompoc Penitentiary in Lompoc, California. And he escaped basically what's considered an over-the-fence escape, although he crawled under the fence. And he thought he had been captured right away because there was a perimeter guard, two corrections officers, in a Jeep that made a circle of the perimeter on an ongoing basis. And I got this after, of course, we arrested him, and we sat for a number of hours talking about what happened and the escape and so forth. And he says, I thought they had me. And he says, I stood by a tree just outside the walls, and they drove past me. They didn't see me. They just drove on past me. And he says he spent the next 2 or 3 days in the woods, and on the end of the third day, he heard the yard owl siren at the prison. He realized he'd gone in a huge circle and was back at the prison. And he finally found his way away, and then found some resources and some people who were bank robbers would help bank robbers and so forth, and that's how he got into his career of robbing banks. And then we were called in after the escape, because that's what marshals do. We track down fugitives. And so that was a huge case for us to work on. It took about 19 months from the time he escaped to the time we arrested him.
Now, how does that start? Because obviously, the guy comes up missing, and he had gone to the ground. At one point he was eating bugs. He was living with a nice little Earth mama who really didn't care, and at some point helped him rob banks. And I guess I don't want you to give away the trade secrets here, but once it goes, okay, this guy is not where he's supposed to be, what happens then?
Well, of course, the investigation started in California, and there were case agents assigned to it there. And you begin to gather up as much information as you possibly can. The contacts he had with people on the outside, certainly informants. There's no question about it that and inmates in federal penitentiaries understand their conversations are overheard by intelligence people within the corrections staff. So based on all those things, we started to develop leads. And, I'll tell you, Lincoln, the philosophy of most of the people that I worked with was that a good fugitive builds a wall around himself. And the way you can get into that wall is by throwing mud against it. And eventually you'll find a spot where that sticks in the hole in the wall, and then you start to work on that hole and build on it, trying to get behind that wall, that facade that he's built to keep him as a fugitive. And in this case, it came through an informant. And the informant had actually very good information. That was the chink we needed. He didn't know exactly where Boyce was, but we began to find handwriting analysis and all kinds of information about his activities here in the Pacific Northwest and why he came here. It was the Falcon and the Snowman. His interest was in the Peregrine Falcons, and we have quite a population of them on the Olympic Peninsula here just outside Seattle.
Now, his arrest was not quite Hollywood. It was fairly textbook, as I understand it. You caught him in the middle of eating a hamburger, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I know. In that, it's interesting, and once again, it was much better than a shootout. It was a dull day. We had 4 teams, 2 officer or 2 federal agents in each team, FBI agents and deputy US Marshals. My partner was a female. And our cover story was that I was employed by the Park Service and had been relocated to the Olympic National Forest. And the reason I was staying in a hotel with her, and of course we had separate rooms, but people didn't realize that we were husband and wife when we were looking to relocate in the Port Angeles area. And we had a home that we were trying to find, trying to find a home for us to live in. We were on per diem, but from the Forest Service, so that that explained our ability to stay in a hotel and go to restaurants and so forth. And that's what we did, basically, was went to the restaurants and to the hotels in the area, always just this covert surveillance kind of thing. And one day, one of the teams says, I think we spotted him at the Pit Stop Drive-In. And we were afraid to move on it because he might make us. Can we get another unit up here to positively identify him? And Ann and I, that's the FBI agent, Ann Miller and I, had a little Malibu station wagon. I turned off the police radio, pulled in next to him, and as he looked out the window of that car, he looked exactly as he did in the wanted poster. He had not changed his appearance a single bit. And I stepped out of the car, walked over to where the other agents were. We surrounded the car with our weapons drawn. He was taken totally by surprise, and as you point out, Lincoln, he was eating a hamburger, and from that, the famous line, drop the hamburger, came out of that. And instead of drop the gun, it was drop the hamburger. We were just trying to get him handcuffed at the time, and the hamburger was in the way. But anyway, we got him into custody, airlifted him over to Seattle, and he went to prison.
As I understand, you actually had a rep as far as dropping the hamburger. When you were transport prisoners, you were actually fairly decent to them, and you had a vegan. You made sure he got a vegetarian meal. Folks were happy with a stop at McDonald's. So I hear about you stopping at McDonald's, but you made poor Christopher drop his burger. Did he at least get to finish the burger after you took him into custody?
Well, you know what? I think he got a number of burgers after that on the federal government, so we made up for it.
Okay, fair enough. So most of this stuff usually comes to guys like they're eating a hamburger or walking out of a men's room. It's fairly textbook stuff, it sounds. But then again, you ended up having to go get a guy by the name of Martin Pang, and Pang was no nice guy, as a matter of fact.
Well, yeah, Martin Pang is, to some degrees, has been miscast there. Martin, what he did was he set a fire to collect insurance on his parents' warehouse here in the International District of Seattle. And when the firefighters went in to fight the fire, four of them were lost. And so they eventually charged Martin Pang with manslaughter. He left the United States and went to Brazil. Now, this was not a federal case, but US Marshals are the Interpol representative for the United States government. So when it was determined that Pang had probably left the United States, then I was made a member of the task force, which included Steve O'Leary, homicide detective from the Seattle Police Department, and FBI agents, and the arson investigator from the Seattle Fire Department. And between the group of us, we were able to find a location for Martin down in Brazil and get a provisional warrant of arrest for him. And, of course, we have no authority in another country. We had to have the Brazilian authorities arrest him. And he was taken into custody, and he's now serving a 35-year prison sentence here in the Washington State Department of Corrections.
Now, you know, a lot of these guys, like Christopher Boyce at one point said he was not going to be taken alive. How often did you catch these guys and they just sort of shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, you got me? How often is it they're actually kind of relieved that the whole circus is finally over?
Well, you know, that's a great question, because I've had a number of people throughout the course of my career that have said they won't be taken alive. You go to the parents or the informant or whoever, and they'll say, better be careful because he said he won't be taken alive. And my response to that was always, you know, for every fugitive that I've had to kill, I carve a notch in the butt of my gun. And I said, if you look at the butt of my gun, there are no notches.
Well, and I would think, too, that when you first bust out or you're in the midst of committing your crime, there's bravado there, but it's probably a whole different thing when you look up and you, in fact, are surrounded by a group of marshals who do have guns, and now we're talking real world as opposed to bragging rights. Right,
exactly. You know, numerical superiority was always something I liked. A surprise was always something I liked. I remember there was some bank robbers down in Vancouver, Washington, and they were both fugitives at the time because they were out on parole violations. And they had taken a family hostage overnight and held them. They were the banker's family. They went the next morning. They were able to compromise the vault, and they stole $167,000 out of the vault. And as they left, the wife of the banker said, well, what are we going to do? She says, what are you going to do with us? We've all seen your faces. And with that, one of the bank robbers walked over to a desk, and he put his palm on top of the desk, and he says, ma'am, he says, in 20 minutes after we leave this bank, the US Marshals, the FBI, and the local police will know who robbed this bank. However, if they have any doubts whatsoever, have them come over here and dust this tabletop, and they'll damn sure know who robbed your bank. And with that, they went into the night. And, we captured both of them in very inauspicious ways. One in a laundromat in San Francisco, and his partner in Schaumburg, Illinois, coming out of a motel room.
How would it be to be a bank robber getting caught cleaning, washing your underwear at a laundromat? Now, things aren't always like, well, you as a marshal, kind of like Johnny Cash, you've been everywhere. Tell us a little bit. You were in Hawaii, and things got a little hairy there, as I understand it.
Yeah, this was early on in my career, and it was kind of an interesting story. We had two protected witnesses on the witness protection program, and we felt that we were in a very secure circumstance because we were on a military base. And so one of the guys that we had with us, and these are not people who are in custody. They're in the witness protection program, but they're not going to serve a prison term or anything like that. They are going to testify, and their lives were in danger. As a matter of fact, one of the people that was set to testify in the case was killed 3 days before we left the mainland to fly to Hawaii for the trial. So these were serious people, and they killed a lot of people. There was no question about it. And we were on an Army base, and one of the local guys who was an MP, we were in the gym working out, and he came over to the local police officer that was my partner, and they had a conversation, and the police officer came to me and he said, Denny, we've got a problem. And I said, what's that? And he says, look out the window. He says, some of Nappy's boys are out there, Nappy being the target of the investigation. And like 6 huge Samoans are in the car, and as they're getting out, the car's, gaining height. And they're big guys, and I'm sure they had guns, and they were waiting for us. And how they got there, we don't know. But we immediately called for backup. And in Hawaii, the officers over there used their personal cars. And all of a sudden, there were sirens coming in, and these guys jumped back in their car and headed across the field and crashed through a fence and eventually got away. Years later, as a matter of fact, I'm now in the bail bond business, and I went over to post a bond at Redmond District Court, and there was the police officer that worked with me on that detail. He transferred over here, and he was now a King County deputy sheriff.
Wow. Now, after your time in the Marshals, your wife, Gail, basically says you went into retirement, but as Gail puts it, you flunked retirement, and you went into the bail bonds business. Now, never having had to call one myself, thank the Lord, typically what the American public, unless they've actually had to call a bail bondsman, their view of that is like Dog the Bounty Hunter. He tases somebody and then gives them a cigarette on the way back to jail. How has the face of bail bonding changed over the years, and what was it like for you to transition from one thing into another?
Yeah, it wasn't really a hard transition for me. Let me tell you a little bit about my philosophy. I was a Seattle police officer for 5 years before I went to the Marshal Service, and I learned a lot from older cops. And I came from a very humble and poor background, and I just thought I was really lucky and very blessed to have the job that I did and the opportunity to serve the people of the United States of America. I heard your intro there with the Fugitive movie and so forth, and Tommy Lee Jones. And remember when he was standing in the culvert, and Harrison Ford was getting ready to jump out, and Harrison Ford turned around and he says, "I didn't kill my wife." And Tommy Lee Jones says, "I don't care." And marshals are kind of that way. We had a job to go out and execute a court order, that court order being a warrant of arrest, or many other court orders as well. So we always took that job as that's what we did. We didn't decide the fate of that person. We weren't judgmental. We just went out and we did our job, which was to arrest people. And I felt that that's my service to the people of the United States of America. Interestingly, speaking of Christopher Boyce, years later, I was contacted by his pro bono attorney, and I was able to provide her with the documents that actually got Christopher Boyce's parole date reduced. And he's now out. And the attorney said, "That's really odd. Why would you help me?" And I said, "It's not my job to judge. I have the documents. You're proceeding in a legal fashion. And if my general counsel says I can give them to you, I'll be happy to do that." And so I believe that prisoners have rights as well as do all American citizens. And I got in the bail bond business, and we have an 8th Amendment constitutional right to have a fair bail set. And the U.S. Marshals used to be blind-eyed, and I try to be blind-eyed as a bail agent. I don't make judgments. That's a higher pay grade than me that gets to do that. I do help to assure their 8th Amendment constitutional rights to get them out of jail with a fair bail.
Now, to that end, actually, people that you have dealt with, and people, in fact, that you took into custody as a marshal or dealt with, have had high praise for you. And I think that's kind of interesting that the guy that nabbed them or got them from one prison to the other actually developed a good rapport with the people who he had in his custody.
Yeah, like I say, I believe that the people that were truly my boss were not just. It wasn't just the U.S. Marshal of the district. It wasn't just the chief deputy or the Attorney General of the United States. It was the people that you see around you, the other American citizens. Those are the people I serve, and people who get into trouble are American citizens, and they still have rights, and those rights must be respected. And therefore, it was an easy transition for me to make getting into the bail bond business, because that's the way I viewed it. I believe that I helped to assure American citizens their rights.
Now, you've seen law enforcement from all levels, and there was a particularly disturbing story today out of Florida in which a 17-year-old girl held her mother at gunpoint, pistol whipped her to take her to a car dealership to buy a used car. As someone who's been in the business of law enforcement in various facets for many, many years now, is the world becoming a worse, more dangerous place, or are we just being better informed about how many bad people are out there?
Well, probably a combination of the two. I think we're better informed, yes, but I also think that certain elements of entertainment and so forth desensitize people to crimes. I see young men every day that carry firearms and are looking forward to using them as gang members and so forth, never realizing, you know, when you shoot somebody and there's blood and there's that smell and there's that tunnel vision and all of these things that can happen that are really, really bad things, shooting someone is not a macho thing to do. It's not a brave thing to do. A lot of times it's a cowardly thing to do, and it will change the lives of so many people. Mothers will suffer, children will suffer, the whole community suffers. And so I think that when people are desensitized to these issues, yes, to answer that, yeah, we are desensitized in a more violent world.
You know, I grew up in a pretty scary neighborhood that could be pretty scary at times, and we certainly had more than our fair share of hoodlums and gang members, too, for that matter. As a matter of fact, I was in a gang for a little while just to keep from getting beaten up every day, but it never occurred to anybody, as bad as the neighborhood was, you know, you never had this issue of kids running around with guns. You know, you got beat up, there was occasionally, you know, a knife would be produced, but, you know, shootings back in the 70s and the 80s seemed pretty rare in my neighborhood, and that seems to have changed over the years.
Well, yeah, it definitely has, Lincoln. There's no question about it. When I was a kid growing up, and that's a long time ago, we didn't know the word drive-by shooting. I mean, it never came into the conversation. I mean, people got shot occasionally, but it wasn't an active passage into a gang or anything like that. People just, you know, had more respect for one another, I think, in those days.
You know, and to that end, you know, I could have you tell war stories all day, and believe me, I want to, but we got a number of things to cover here today. One of the things that you've come up with, because it is getting to be summer, kids are going to be out on their bikes, and people are going to be on vacation. People are going to be outdoors more. You've come up with a set of strategies to make sure that as you're out and about, not just during the summer, but during the rest of the year as well, you can stay safe. And let's take a minute and diagram those.
You know, and I always, I don't pretend to know all the answers to things like that. I'll tell you what we do here in our community. My wife, Gail Brandon, and I own the company, and she's really the smart one, and I rely on her for, you know, so much expertise and so forth. But one of the things that we do, we participate in Crime Stoppers of Puget Sound. Both of us sit on the board of directors. We have had playing cards with wanted fugitives on it, made up to distribute in the various jail facilities, so that people, once again, keeping track of fugitives and so forth, will look and find, you know, this guy has never been found, and here's his picture on a playing card, and somebody may know where that person is. We have a great deal of faith in Crime Stoppers. I always tell people, you know, the local police in your area, your local Crime Stoppers, which is a nonprofit nationwide organization, have a lot of information about what goes on in your community, and those are great resources for people out there as the summer comes along. You know, find out what those guys know, find out what they think is a good thing to do with your children to keep them in a safe environment. And those resources are local. They have the local flavor, if you will. They know the right answers and the right players and so forth. And I've been associated with Crime Stoppers for all of these years. Great organization. Put in a plug for a nonprofit here, because you can anonymously bring information to law enforcement, receive a reward for it, and no one will ever know who you were and how that information got to the police.
Now, in addition to that, you also talk about the need to form, you know, here in Utah, we, you know, are perceived by the rest of the nation as relatively isolated and relatively wide-eyed and innocent. That, of course, has changed over the years in many parts of the state, not just the urban centers. New and different and more innovative crimes, particularly, you know, with the arrival of methamphetamine became a problem. One of the things people can do is watch out for themselves. You advocate starting a neighborhood watch program, and, you know, they're not too hard to organize.
Yeah, you know, that's right. And I have dealt with neighborhood watch organizations. I was the president of one of our condominium associations up here, and I've sat on the board of directors of the condominium association that we live in today. And, you know, I'll tell you, there's a real basic premise to that, and it's a real simple thing. It's a human nature thing, and it's this. if you see something, and I don't mean to be a busybody or prying into other people's business, but if you see something that looks out of the ordinary and is odd, it may well be. And maybe it's a good idea to jot down that license plate. Maybe it's a good idea to ask a couple more questions without, putting yourself obviously in any kind of danger or anything like that. And just making a mental note or jotting something down. Many, many times, investigating fugitives, that was what I'd heard. Wow, that looked really odd. I was surprised at the hours those people came and went. I was surprised at some of the things they did. But I never thought to make a note of that. So, yeah, it's a human nature thing, and if it looks odd, it may be it.
And one of the things that the police here have said over and over and over again is that, even one piece of information that may seem pretty innocuous or have nothing to do with the subject at hand may be the one key they've been waiting on to put something together on a suspect.
Oh, that's true, yeah. And once again, it goes back to that thing about the wall that fugitives and criminals and so forth build around themselves. The thing that you don't think is very important sometimes is a very important thing. Let the police figure that out, but if they don't have that in their case reports, or they don't have that information, then they can't explore it.
As eventually summer is going to get here. I don't know if it ever stops raining up in Washington where you are, but we're betting at some point, the nights are going to stop getting down to 22, 21 degrees, and the days will get longer, the nights will get warmer, and we'll be out and enjoying those. What do you recommend when people are out, either on vacation, simply around their neighborhood, or in an unfamiliar neighborhood? If we're out enjoying the night air and the night sensations, what should we be keeping in mind?
Well, obviously, personal safety is always a critical element of it. So, be aware of your surroundings. Law enforcement always talks about, situational awareness. And that's not a bad thing for civilians to apply also. And it gets back to that thing. I remember I was walking down a street in Las Vegas here a few years ago, and my wife had a purse slung over her shoulder, and I noticed this guy was kind of walking parallel to us and watching her. And I said, here's what we're going to do. Move your purse to the other shoulder, grab it, and let's look him in the eye. And as soon as we did, he turned and bolted and ran. It was odd. It was different. Why was he, looking at us? Staying in groups. If I'm in odd, strange cities and so forth, I will usually try to go out with friends or people that I know, people who are familiar with the area. And I've traveled all over the world, and I always try to nail down somebody. I used to get in the Philippines when I was working over there. There was a lot of terrorist activity, guerrilla activity, so forth in the 1980s. And I find cab drivers, and money was a huge deal with them, and they were very loyal to you. And they would wait for you in a cab and drive you where you wanted to go and tell you it was a bad place to go and a good place to go. So, stay in those groups, establish people that you believe you can trust, and keep your eyes open.
There you go. Another thing that you are involved in, you are a part, your bail bonds organization is part of a group of folks called ExpertBail. It's a nationwide organization. Tell us a little bit about that, and then tell us about Making a Difference, which is a part of ExpertBail.
Well, I'm very excited about ExpertBail. I'll tell you why. It is the first time that anyone has ever come up with a system whereby bail bond company people could get nationwide response from a bail bond company. Now, I think what Tip O'Neill once said, all politics is local, and all bail bonds is local. I think there's 245 counties in the state of Texas, and you'll find 245 different ways to write bonds. There are 39 counties in the state of Washington, and there are 39 different ways of writing bail bonds. So corporate mentality doesn't work very well. Cookie-cutter mentality doesn't work very well. But ExpertBail is an organization that has a nationwide presence. It's administered by Allegheny International and the Associated Insurance Company, which is our surety company. It is an organization of bail bond agents who have retained a level of expertise that most bail bond agents don't have. Professionalism. My wife and I are in business suits every day when we go to the office. You're right. We don't run through the streets with guns drawn. We are, in fact, business people who do underwriting. We bring in people that are families, that are your neighbors, your coworkers, your friends, and we help them to get their life back together. And if you're in Connecticut and you have someone that's been arrested in the city of Seattle, you can go to www.expertbail.com, and you can get a resource in Seattle to help you get your loved one out of jail. And you can depend that that bail agent will treat you fairly, will not have any hidden costs, and will do business in a most forthright and professional fashion.
Now, as we kind of started, the traditional image of a bail bondsman is Dog the Bounty Hunter with a taser, or somebody leaping out of a dumpster with a pistol. But the Making a Difference program is a neat thing, because we have bail bonds agents finding ways to kind of get out in front of bad behavior and changing attitudes, changing the way people behave, and changing lives in the process.
That's very true. And one of the things that our organization has done through AIA, our surety company, is that we have partnered with the National Center for Victims of Violent Crime. And my wife and I gave presentations there last summer in New Orleans. And we were a little bit surprised to see bail bond agents come to their organization and talk about victims' rights. And that's one of the things that we protect. Bail agents do three things. Bail agents assure the smooth running of the criminal justice system by ensuring that the person goes to court. And if they don't go to court, we fine them and or reschedule the court date. And if we can't do that, we write a check to the court. And we do all that at no expense to the taxpayer. But getting people to court also assures victims of their justice. Because if the fugitive takes off and can't be found, no one gets justice here. And so we believe strongly that we also promote the justice that all American citizens are entitled to have.
Now, Denny, of course, the $64 questionnaire is, when are you going to write a book?
Well, I don't know. I've been approached a couple of times. One of my best friends, Louis McKinney, he was, the second African-American director of the US Marshal Service, but he was the only one that worked his way up through the ranks. He's a dear friend of mine. He just wrote a book called One Marshal's Badge, which is an interesting book, and I've read it and I liked it. In fact, he mentions me in the book as in the Christopher Boyce arrest. Yeah, I think there's a book in me somewhere, but every day I get up and the downside of sleeping with the boss is that she expects me to go to work every day.
There you go. Well, our guest this morning, Denny Behrend. Denny, as we wait on the book to come out, I'm sure that's due any day now, how do we find out more about you? How do we find out more about the organization and Making a Difference? Yeah,
www.expertbail.com is the best way to get in touch with it. We have a 800 number as well, which is 1-800-938-BAIL, B-A-I-L. And certainly there are people there. Actually, they're staffed 24 hours a day, and they can provide information. AIA, Allegheny International and Associated Surety Company in Calabasas, California, is also a great resource. We have a staff of attorneys down there and people that are in touch with law enforcement agencies, bail bond companies, all across the nation.